In the 1950s, researcher Kurt Richter placed wild rats into cylinders of water to see how long they would swim. These animals were physically robust, yet most stopped struggling and sank after barely 15 minutes. Their biology suggested they should have lasted much longer. The limit wasn't in their muscles, but in the psychological assumption that survival was impossible. Richter then introduced a second group. Right before these rats went under, he scooped them to safety, held them briefly, and then put them back. He repeated this several times, teaching the animals that their situation wasn't permanent. With the expectation of rescue now established, these same rats swam for 60 hours. The learned belief that survival was possible completely overrode their previous physical limits. This same mechanism dictates human endurance. Most diets or business ventures fail, not because the plan is flawed, but because the psychological conviction supporting the plan gives out. We experience a psychological breaking point long before a physical one. Motivation is the byproduct of these underlying beliefs. When the conviction that an effort matters disappears, the motivation to continue disappears with it. Daniel Giesler underwent surgery to remove metal screws from his ankle, fully awake and without anesthesia. He spent weeks training to direct his attention away from the operating table and toward a mental visualization of a beach. This highlights a massive data gap in human biology. Our senses gather 11 million bits of information a second, but the conscious mind only processes 50 bits. Your prior beliefs act as a keyhole, determining which tiny fraction reaches your conscious awareness. For a software engineer named Maria, a single piece of negative feedback from a manager seeded a belief that her performance was sliding. Her brain's filter then began highlighting for minor errors while ignoring her successes, trapping her in a loop of self-doubt that cost her a promotion. No one experiences the world exactly as it is. We navigate a simulation constructed from the narrow slice of data our beliefs have marked as worth noticing. Liquid Death sells spring water from the Austrian Alps that is chemically identical to much cheaper alternatives, yet the company is valued at over $1 billion because consumers are buying the anticipated experience created by the branding. This is predictive processing. Your brain functions as a prediction machine, building a simulation of what it expects to feel. Once a belief sets the scene, the body undergoes a physiological reconfiguration. Your anticipation triggers feelings that confirm your original belief. In one study, participants drinking identical wine rated the bottle labeled as a $45 vintage as more complex. Brain scans showed their pleasure centers actually responded more strongly to the expensive label. Longevity research by Becca Levy showed that adults with positive views on aging lived 7 years longer on average. This psychological expectation had a greater impact on lifespan than exercise or maintaining a healthy weight. At the extreme end, Tibetan monks can generate enough body heat through meditation to melt frost in freezing chambers. These expectations alter the body's physical responses. What we anticipate doesn't just change our mood, it changes the upper limits of our physical endurance. If attention is what you see and anticipation is what you feel, agency is the capacity to act when the outcome is uncertain. In the 1960s, Martin Seligman observed dogs that had been subjected to shocks they couldn't stop. When later placed in a situation where they could easily escape, they simply stayed still. He termed this learned helplessness. Modern research by Stephen Mayer suggests a different conclusion. Passivity isn't learned, it is the brain's default biological response to situations that seem uncontrollable. Taking action requires the ventromedial prefrontal cortex to override this default. It activates a hope circuit only when the brain detects that effort will lead to a better outcome. Agency must be built on top of our natural tendency toward passivity. We have to reinforce the circuitry that proves our actions actually shape the world. The former CEO of SolidCore used her acute focus to build a massive fitness brand. However, that same intense mindset eventually became a blind spot, preventing her from noticing a toxic culture until her staff petitioned for her removal. To prevent your beliefs from becoming blind spots, practice selective skepticism. Ask whether a specific belief is serving your goals or if you are merely serving the belief. To break a cycle of negative thoughts, use third-person self-talk. Referring to yourself by name creates the distance needed to assess your situation with the same clarity you'd give a friend. Rituals also serve to reset emotional states. Students who practiced spiritual phrases for 2 weeks were able to endure an ice water challenge for twice as long as those using neutral phrases. These practices frame beliefs as upgradable tools. Choosing to see your assumptions as instruments for performance allows you to adapt when the evidence changes. Most of the limits you accept today are not fixed realities. They are unexamined beliefs that can be consciously challenged and rewritten.